Hello, I'm Congressman Ted Lieu from Southern California. I am also a veteran, and I'm so honored to be joined by Triste, who is also a veteran. And we're going to talk about the harmful effects of the Trump administration's actions on veterans. And let me first let you all know that we are going to be pushing back and fighting hard to make sure that we protect all Americans, including Americans who happen to be veterans. And joining me is Triste. I'm going to ask her a number of different questions, and I really look forward to this conversation. So, Triste, tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what brought you into the service.
Well, first of all, thank you, Representative Lieu, for hosting this important conversation on honoring our Veterans Advocacy Day. My name is Tristeza Ordex. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and the national organizer for partnerships and engagement at VoteVets, the nation's oldest and largest network of progressive veterans. I actually grew up on the West Coast in Oregon, and I joined the Marine Corps in 2004. And made my way here to Texas, where I live now, after I retired from the Marine Corps in 2014. It's been a journey getting to where I'm at now with doing work to bring attention to veterans issues, and advocating for even issues outside of that. You know, one of the biggest issues that's very near and dear to my heart is what's going on with immigration, and to be able to lend my voice and my story in connection with that has been very empowering.
And as you know, the Trump administration has already caused a reduction of about 17,000 people from the Veterans Administration. They're targeting about another 12,000 more for a total of nearly 30,000 people to be cut from the VA. In your experience working with the different veterans partners groups, what have you seen in terms of the VA and how it's responding to veteran services, especially with its dramatically smaller workforce?
You know, as someone that uses VA services for healthcare and other things, it's been very disheartening to see that we have individuals that say that they're patriots and that they love veterans, to actually be betraying us. Um, Eliminating these positions is not going to make our VA function any better. And, you know, everyone can say that there's always things that we can improve on in the VA, but cutting jobs is not one of them. And we're going to continue to see how this is going to affect us in mental health, women's services, and so many other things, you know, with the cuts that are going on with Medicaid and with SNAP. Those things also are going to contribute to the harm that this is going to cause veterans and military families.
There's also, I think, a little bit of a misconception that veterans rely on the VA and therefore they don't need Medicaid. But as you know, it turns out that there's over 1.5 million veterans that do rely on Medicaid, and they maybe live far away from a VA, or maybe they have other issues that require Medicaid. Can you explain a little bit as to why it is that the deep Medicaid cuts and the Republicans' big, ugly law also affect veterans?
We know that there are veterans that supplement some of their health care through Medicaid, Medicare, and we're going to see that this is going to affect veterans' housing assistance and other programs that we rely on in order to be able to supplement what we don't get through the VA. It's dangerous, you know. And you know, I would pose this question to you: is how have you seen in the work that you've done and the veterans that you have talked to, in your capacity, and how this is going to affect military veterans and families?
So I'm glad you mentioned families. So veterans are also part of, obviously, of families, and it turns out that Medicaid provides about 2/3 of the funding for people who are in nursing homes. And so when you dramatically cut that, then that's going to impact the whole family, because now it's really hard to, for example, take care of your parents if they can't get the funding. And so that dramatically affects how people can live their daily life. All of a sudden, now they have to take care of their parents in a way they were able to get Medicaid funding in the past. So this is going to have some deep effects across many sectors of society. And you're also right. There are many veterans who do supplement their healthcare with Medicaid, especially if they have uh, chronic diseases or disabilities. And also, there are veterans who just live really quite far away from a VA, and Medicaid provides an option for them to get the healthcare that they need.
I'd like to jump in here too, because you kind of touched on something that I am personally living. When I joined the Marine Corps was because I was working out in the fields, and I would think to myself, I do not want my parents or I don't want my family out here doing this work their entire life. I want them to have the thing that they wanted, that they came to this country for. And that was one of the big reasons why I joined the Marine Corps. Was like, I want something different for my family. And some of it too was I want to have a career that could lead to something where I can take care of my parents. And I currently take care of my mom, my dad, and paz descanse. I always wanted to do the same thing for him. And I think about that, about what this is gonna, the stress that it puts on families. Me, that I have VA benefits, but that's not something that I could pass to my parent. And having to rely on Medicaid and SNAP and things like that are very helpful for families like mine that don't have the means to pay for health care for their parents that they take care of.
Also, just as part of this conversation, it occurred to me that the reason that we help veterans is not only because it is the right thing to do, but also it is important for our national security. Because if you're looking at entering our military, and first of all, we have an all volunteer military, you're going to be looking at, well, how do we treat our veterans? And if we don't treat our veterans well, then that becomes a disincentive for people who want to join our military. So this is also a national security issue. And I know that a number of veterans are deeply concerned about what they see in terms of national security with this administration. And can you touch a little bit about what you're hearing from the veterans groups out there?
Yes, one of the biggest things that has come up in conversations for me as I've talked to veterans organizations and connected with veterans across the country the last couple months has been what's going on with ICE and DHS abuses. And for me, talking with you, a person that represents California, a military veteran, I'm sure that you have seen this touch folks in California very intimately, both as it intersects with their immigrant status or their military service. And, as a veteran, I think about how, one, I lend my voice to make sure that folks know the truth about what's happening behind this, but also that anyone can get touched by this. It could literally come to your doorstep. We saw it happen to George Retes, and in that conversation of what's happened to him personally, because he is a U.S. citizen that was unlawfully detained. And also families like mine, families like Alejandro Barrancos, a Marine who has two brothers also serving on active duty in the Marine Corps. And they were touched by what's going on with these ICE and DHS abuses. Veterans really want to know what is going on and why these things are happening and why folks are being targeted and why the rules are not being followed, because there are rules that are not being followed. And for folks that are saying that we have to do things the right way, they are not doing things the right way. And so that affects military readiness. It affects what we are trying to accomplish with our folks on the active duty side with Marines, and making sure that they're doing the job that they're being trained to do, not to be on our streets terrorizing families and communities. So I think that a question that I would like to ask you is, how do you respond to critics who argue that being tough on immigration doesn't affect our national security?
Well, so thanks so much for that question. I'm glad you mentioned the unlawfulness of what is happening with the ICE agents and Border Patrol agents. So, in order to have an arrest occur, for law enforcement to arrest someone, you need to meet this. You need to meet the standard of probable cause. In order to detain someone, you need to meet a standard called reasonable suspicion. And in neither of those two cases can you use race to justify probable cause or reasonable suspicion. And so when ICE goes out and just goes to a park in Los Angeles or a business like Home Depot and rounds up brown people. That is illegal. It's a violation of the Constitution. And now a federal district judge has said so, as well as a federal court of appeals. And hopefully, we will continue to win on those cases. But I urge the Department of Homeland Security to follow the law. They cannot engage in mass racial profiling, which is what they're doing. And then to make it even worse, you have the president deploying Marines to basically assist in this racial profiling. And so you now have our military that's assisting in illegal and unlawful orders. And that is deeply troubling. And I know a number of veterans are reacting with horror at this deployment of the military against the American people in places like Los Angeles. And then we saw, in addition to that, that these Marines literally did nothing. There was nothing for them to do. They just sort of stood around because the president just made up all this bad stuff that allegedly was happening. And in fact, what you had were people who were exercising their First Amendment rights. Of course, there were some incidents of violence that local law enforcement was perfectly fine and capable of handling. So there was zero reason to deploy Marines against Americans in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add here is, I recently saw that there was the DHS Assistant Secretary made comments that DACA folks should self-deport. And as both you and I know, folks with DACA status and current immigrant status that have not received their citizenship yet through their service can possibly get caught in some of this as well. And that, I think that it goes back to the national security and military readiness. One, we're going to have a hard time being able to retain folks or to recruit folks when we are criminalizing people for the way that they look or their family members. And we talk about having the ability to recruit and retain top talent, but we can't do that when we are coming after our own people on these streets.
That's absolutely right. And I just want to highlight that's so important for Americans to exercise their First Amendment rights, to protest, to rally, to march, to go to town halls. And the reason, for example, that we know that the 3 Marines who had their father unlawfully taken. Reason we know about that is, one, we have a free and fair press, but also we have people who are willing to speak out and to document and to witness what happened. So I encourage people to continue to do that. And it does have an effect. So the administration did, in fact, return Mr. Garcia from El Salvador. They didn't have to do that. They did that. He is facing a trial here in the United States, but at least he has due process and the ability to defend himself. And that was because of public pressure that they brought him back. Recently, we saw the administration release a whole bunch of education funds that were frozen. And you do see the administration taking actions because people are rising up and telling the administration they don't like what they're seeing. And the polling shows that as well. According to a Gallup poll, the president is only at 37% approval, one of the lowest of any modern president in U.S. history. The only time it's been lower is during Donald Trump's first term during COVID. And so the public is not with this administration or with this president or with the Republicans in Congress. And we just have to keep pushing back and fighting back.
I agree. I first got started in this work showing up to a protest and here in Texas back when they passed the Texas Ledge passed the first Show Me Your Papers bill. And, I took my son at the time, he was 10 years old. It was actually about 8 years ago. And being able to come back to this work and see the effectiveness of public pressure, people speaking out and saying, this is not what you said you were going to do. What you're doing is not okay. It's dangerous. It's un-American. And we demand answers. And, from what we have seen both through social discourse and conversation is that veterans want answers. They want to know why this is happening, why power is being abused, and the things that were said that were going to be fixed are actually being broken. We're losing healthcare. We're losing resources. We're spending more time on culture wars than we are on fixing the issue with housing, the issue with accessing healthcare, the issue with accessing affordable education in this country. And those are the things that we really need to be focusing on. And veterans, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, want the same thing. They want to know what we're going to do to help them be able to pay rent next month, and that they're making good pay to be able to not be paycheck to paycheck. So these conversations are so important to have, and to be talking about them, whether it be at a protest or on social media, the way that we're going to be doing, and also in organizing the folks that live at home with you and having these conversations there at home, because sometimes some of those hardest talks come with talking to our family members that aren't necessarily with the program.
That's right. And I also want to say that I, along with other members of Congress, help establish their Democratic Veterans Caucus this term. It's being co-chaired by Congress members Pat Ryan and Chris DeLuzio. And so we're having a lot of conversations with lots of people, and not all of them are easy. Some of them are hard conversations, and it's important to have those conversations, but really to also just highlight the facts and what this administration is doing in terms of harming military veterans and their families. And so I want to thank you again for joining me on this conversation about veterans and the harms that this administration is causing to our veterans, and want to give you the opportunity to say any concluding remarks. And just want to thank you again so much for your service to our country and for participating in this conversation.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. I really appreciate you making the time for this. I hope that everyone has enjoyed our conversation. To get involved with VoteVets and our work, follow us on social media, stay connected, signing up to our email list. And if you really want to throw down with us, go to our link in our bio and fill out the VoteVets action form, where you can tell us your story, the issues that you care about, and what you want to do.
Thank you so much.